Thinking of starting up some new series. We might have some art shows here on the channel. I have most of the supplies already, but I need a place to put the paint thinner. It's somewhat toxic, and so I need like a glass jar or something I can put it in. But anyway, we can and will continue with our Russian Author series. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me for this series. Thank you for following on Twitch. Thank you for subscribing on YouTube. Scummer Show, there you go, just so you know. Chapter 8, War and Peace. Part 3, I believe. Yeah, book 3 is what we're on. Oops. Okay, there we go. I fast forwarded. The day after Rostov had been to see Boris, a review was held of the Austrian and Russian troops, both those freshly arrived from Russia and those who had been campaigning under Kutuzov. The two emperors, the Russian with his heir the Tsarevich, and the Austrian with the Archduke, inspected the Allied army of 80,000 men. From early morning, the smart, clean troops were on the move, forming up on the field before the fortress. Now thousands of feet and bayonets moved and halted at the officer's command, turned with banners flying, formed up at intervals, and wheeled around other similar masses of infantry, in different uniforms. Now was heard the rhythmic beat of hoofs and the jingling of showy cavalry in blue, red, and green braided uniforms, with smartly dressed bandsmen in front mounted on black, roan, or gray horses. Then again, spreading out with the brazen clatter of the polished, shining cannon that quivered on the gun carriages, and with the smell of linstocks, came the artillery which crawled between the infantry and cavalry and took up its appointed position. We will probably never engage in war like this again. I mean, not even with the wars we've seen in like Afghanistan and Iraq. Like, I think that form of warfare with the IUDs and whatnot is going to become less and less common in the future. Nuclear war, of course, is a possibility, but yeah, war is gonna, it just keeps changing. Not only the generals in full parade uniforms with their thinner, thick waists drawn into the utmost, their red necks squeezed into their stiff collars, and wearing scarves and other decorations, not only the elegant, pomaded officers, but every soldier with his freshly washed and shaven face, and his weapons clean and polished to the utmost, and every horse groomed till its coat shone like satin, and every hair of its wetted mane lay smooth, felt that no smaller matter was happening, but an important and solemn affair. Every general and every soldier was conscious of his own insignificance, aware being but a drop in that ocean of men, and yet at the same time it was conscious of his strength as a part of that enormous whole. From early morning, strenuous activities and efforts had begun, and by 10 o'clock all had been brought into due order. The ranks were drawn up on the vast field. The whole army was extended in 3 lines. The cavalry in front, behind it the artillery, and behind that again the infantry. A space like a street was left between each 2 lines of troops. The 3 parts of that army were sharply distinguished. Kutuzov's fighting army with the Pavlograds on the right flank of the front, those recently arrived from Russia with both guards and regiments of the line, and the Austrian troops. But they all stood in the same lines, under one command, and in a like order. Yeah, and all of them to face off against Napoleon. Which I think just goes to show how amazing and how powerful the Grand Army was. Like, you have the French, and then you had the Austrians, the Russians. I believe the Austrians and the Russians. Maybe Prussians. AKA German. Like wind over leaves ran an excited whisper. They're coming, they're coming. Alarmed voices were heard, and a stir of final preparation swept over all the troops. From the direction of Olmütz in front of them, a group was seen approaching. And at that moment, though the day was still, a light gust of wind blowing over the army slightly stirred the streamers on the lances, and the unfolded standards fluttered against their staffs. It looked as if, by that slight motion, the army itself was expressing its joy at the approach of the emperors. One voice was heard shouting, "Eyes front!" Then, like the crowing of cocks at sunrise, this was repeated by others from various sides, and all became silent. In the death-like stillness, only the tramp of horses was heard. This was the emperor's suites. The emperor rode up to the flank, and the trumpets of the 1st Cavalry Regiment played the general march. It seemed as though not the trumpeters were playing, but as if the army itself, rejoicing at the emperor's approach, had naturally burst into music. Amid these sounds, only the youthful, kindly voice of the Emperor Alexander was clearly heard. So I think there are more than one Alexander, because there's also Prince Alexander, if I'm not mistaken, of Russia. Emperor Alexander, he's the Austrian ruler, I'm pretty sure. Let me take a look. I guess not, Russian ruler. Yeah, Alexander the First of Russia, okay. Yeah, that's Alexander the First of Russia. He gave the words of greeting, and the 1st Regiment roared, "Hurrah!" so deafeningly, continuously, and joyfully that the men themselves were awed by their multitude and the immensity of the power they constituted. They're like, "Ah, we're gonna beat the French, heck yeah." Rostov, standing on the front lines of Kutuzov's army, which the Tsar approached first, experienced the same feeling as every other man in that army. A feeling of self-forgetfulness, a proud consciousness of might, and a passionate attraction to him who was the cause of this triumph. It's like being like at a concert or something like that, or like at a political rally or something like that. Like people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And that's part of the reason why I think these crowds get so big. Like it's like you can feel the energy in the air, and like everyone can get excited or hyped. Last time I felt that way, it was at a Coldplay concert. This was a couple years ago. The Head Full of Dreams tour, I believe, is what it was called. And we had these like colorful wristbands. And I still remember having a picture, like taking a picture of that. Just such a cool concept. And the wristbands would change color to match the tempo and beat of the song. Yeah, it was definitely cool. It was here in Phoenix, too. It was definitely a good show. He felt that a single word from that man, all this vast mass, and he himself an insignificant atom in it, would go through fire and water, commit crime, die, or perform deeds of highest heroism. And so he could not but tremble and his heart stand still at the imminence of that word. Hurrah! 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 Thundered from all sides, one regiment after another greeting the Tsar with the strains of the march, and then hurrah! Then the general march, and again hurrah! Hurrah! Growing ever stronger and fuller and merging into a deafening roar. Till the Tsar reached it, each regiment in its silence and immobility seemed like a lifeless body. But as soon as he came up, it became alive, its thunder joining the roar of the whole line along which he had already passed. Through the terrible and deafening roar of those voices, amid the square masses of troops standing motionless as if turned to stone, hundreds of riders composing the suites moved carelessly but symmetrically, and above all freely. And in front of them two men, the emperors. Upon the so it's Emperor Alexander of Russia and the Emperor of Austria, which I can't remember his name right now. I can look it up if it's not going to be mentioned in the book. Upon them, the undivided, tensely passionate attention of that whole mass of men was concentrated. The handsome young Emperor Alexander, in the uniform of the Horse Guards, wearing a cocked hat with its peaks front and back, with his pleasant face and resonant, though not loud voice, attracted everyone's attention. Rostov was not far from the trumpeters, and with his keen sight had recognized the Tsar and watched his approach. When he was within 20 paces, and Nicholas could clearly distinguish every detail of his handsome, happy young face, he experienced a feeling tenderness and ecstasy such as he had never before known. Every trait and every movement of the Tsar's seemed to him enchanting. Prince Nicholas. Stopping in front of the Pavlograds, the Tsar said something in French to the Austrian emperor and smiled. Seeing that smile, Rostov involuntarily smiled himself and felt a still stronger flow of love for his sovereign. He longed to show that love in some way, and knowing that this was impossible, was ready to cry. The Tsar called the colonel of the regiment and said a few words to him. "Oh God, what would happen to me if the emperor spoke to me?" thought Rostov. "I should die of happiness." It's like a cult of personality. Like, this tends to happen with, like, particularly charismatic and, yes, in some cases, tyrannical political leaders. Like Kim Jong-un was like that, Donald Trump. They just get like a cult of personality. The Tsar addressed the officers also. "I thank you all, gentlemen. I thank you with my whole heart." To Rostov, every word sounded like a voice from heaven. How gladly would he have died at once for his Tsar. Extremely likable political leaders are that way too, like JFK was that way. You've earned the St. George's standards and will be worthy of them. Oh, to die for him, thought Rostov. The Tsar said something more which Rostov did not hear, and the soldiers, straining their lungs, shouted hurrah. Rostov, too, bending over his saddle, shouted hurrah with all his might, feeling that he would like to injure himself by that shout, if only to express his rapture fully. The Tsar stopped a few minutes in front of the hussars, as if undecided. How can the emperor be undecided, thought Rostov, but then even this indecision appeared to him majestic and enchanting, like everything else the Tsar did. That hesitation lasted only an instant. The Tsar's foot, in the narrow pointed boot then fashionable, touched the groin of the bobtailed bay mare he rode. His hand in a white glove gathered up the reins, and he moved off accompanied by an irregularly swaying sea of aides-de-camp. Farther and farther he rode away, stopping at other regiments, till at last only his white plumes were visible to Rostov from amid the suites that surrounded the emperors. Among the gentlemen of the suite, Rostov noticed Bolkonsky, sitting his horse indolently and carelessly. Rostov recalled their quarrel of yesterday, and the question presented itself whether he ought or ought not to challenge Bolkonsky. Of course not, he now thought. Is it worth thinking or speaking of it at such a moment? At a time of such love, such rapture, and such self-sacrifice? What do any of our quarrels and affronts matter? I love and forgive everybody now. Plus, he might be dead in like a couple hours. When the emperor had passed nearly all the regiments, the troops began a ceremonial march past him. Rostov on Bedouin, recently purchased from Denisov, rode past too, at the rear of his squadron, that is, alone and in full view of the emperor. Before he reached him, Rostov, who was a splendid horseman, spurred Bedouin twice and successfully put him to the showy trot in which the animal went when excited. Bending his foamy muzzle to his chest, his tail extended, Bedouin, as if also conscious of the emperor's eye upon him, passed splendidly, lifting his feet with a high and graceful action, as if flying through the air without touching the ground. So we can get the name of Rostov's horse, but not the Emperor of Austria. Makes sense, Leo. Makes perfect sense. Rostov himself, his legs well back and his stomach drawn in, feeling himself one with his horse, rode past the emperor with a frowning but blissful face, like a very devil, as Denisov expressed it. Fine fellows, the Pavlograds, remarked the emperor. My God, how happy I should be if he ordered me to leap into the fire this instant, thought Rostov. When the review was over, the newly arrived officers and also Kutuzovs collected in groups and began to talk about the awards, about the Austrians and their uniforms, about their lines, about Bonaparte, and how badly the latter would fare now, especially if the Essen Corps arrived and Prussia took our side. But the talk in every group was chiefly about the Emperor Alexander. His every word and movement was described with ecstasy. They all had but one wish, to advance as soon as possible against the enemy under the Emperor's command. Commanded by the Emperor himself, they could not fail to vanquish anyone, be it whom it might. So thought Rostov and most of the officers after the review. All were then more confident of victory than the winning of 2 battles would have made them. Next time we'll be taking a look in Chapter 9. They are gearing up for the Battle of 3 Emperors. And Napoleon Bonaparte is about to show what the Grand Army is capable of. Yeah. As I said, war has dramatically changed since then. I don't think wars even vaguely resemble the way they were at that time. Chapter 4. We find ourselves in Crime and Punishment. Raskolnikov went straight to the house on the canal bank where Sonia lived. Let's see, as a quick recap, they're talking about Sverdlov and how he wants to get with Raskolnikov's sister, pretty sure. Raskolnikov goes to where Sonia is. It was an old green house of 3 stories. He found the porter and obtained from him vague directions as to the whereabouts of Kapernamov, the tailor. Having found in the corner of the courtyard an entrance to the dark and narrow staircase, he mounted to the 2nd floor and came out into a gallery that ran round the whole 2nd story over the yard. While he was wandering in the darkness, uncertain where to turn for Kapernamov's door, a door opened 3 paces from him. He mechanically took hold of it. Who's there? A woman's voice asked uneasily. It's I, come to see you, answered Raskolnikov, and he walked into the tiny entry. On a broken chair stood a candle and a battered copper candlestick. It's you, good heavens, cried Sonia weakly, and she stood rooted to the spot. Which is your room? This way? And Raskolnikov, trying not to look at her, hastened in. A minute later, Sonia too came in with the candle, set down the candlestick, and completely disconcerted, stood before him inexpressibly agitated and apparently frightened by his unexpected visit. Yeah, it just kind of seems to be like the way it was in those days. They just show up at whoever's house. As we might recall, Raskolnikov himself has had at least two unexpected visitors. Sverdlov and Luzhin. And I would even say maybe even Razumhin himself, to a lesser extent. Like, he just doesn't like seeing people. So it's a little bit surprising that he would do it now to Sonia, but he must have a reason. Let's see. The color rushed suddenly to her pale face, and tears came into her eyes. Her mother, I believe, is still alive. Yeah, she has, what's it called? Tuberculosis. And which they referred to in those days as consumption. And she's not doing very well. Sonia's got, I think, some brothers and sisters too. How many, I'm not sure. Marmeladov died in a carriage accident. Her father. She felt sick and ashamed, and happy too. Raskolnikov turned away quickly and sat on a chair by the table. He scanned the room in a rapid glance. It was a large but exceedingly low-pitched room. The only one led by the Kapernamovs, to whose rooms a closed door led in the wall on the left. On the opposite side on the right-hand wall was another door, always kept locked. That led to the next flat, which formed a separate lodging. Sonia's room looked like a barn. It was a very irregular quadrangle, and this gave it a grotesque appearance. A wall with three windows looking out onto the canal ran aslant, so that one corner formed a very acute angle. And it was difficult to see in it without very strong light. This is a family stricken by hardship. Sonia's had to resort to prostitution to help pay the family's bills. The other corner was disproportionately obtuse. There was scarcely any furniture in the big room. In the corner on the right was a bedstead. Beside it, nearest the door, a chair. A plain deal table covered by blue cloth stood against the same wall, close to the door into the other flat. Two rush-bottomed chairs stood by the table. On the opposite wall, near the acute angle, stood a small plain wooden chest of drawers, looking as it were lost in a desert. That was all there was in the room. The yellow, scratched, and shabby wallpaper was black in the corners. Again, very good setting. Description of the settings by Fyodor. It must have been damp and full of fumes in the winter. There was every sign of poverty. Even the bedstead had no curtain. Mine doesn't have one either, for that matter, right now. I just don't like bed curtains in general. Yeah, I just don't like it. It's a personal thing for me. I just don't like them. Sonia looked in silence at her. It's just like one extra thing I have to adjust when I'm like cleaning my sheets or making my bed. And over time, I was just like done with it. Like, I don't want to have to deal with it. I think mine was starting to get worn out and ripped too over time, from having to be like continuously adjusted. Yeah, and now I've just got like my bed frame, my box spring, my mattress, a single sheet on top. Okay. Sonia looked in silence at her visitor. Who was so attentively and unceremoniously scrutinizing her room. Even began to laugh even began at last to tremble with terror, as though she was standing before her judge and the arbiter of her destinies. I'm late. It's 11, isn't it? He asked, still not lifting his eyes. Yes, muttered Sonia. I think I must have forgotten, but I think he arranged to meet with her already. Maybe. I don't know, let me keep reading. I'm late. It's 11, isn't it? He asked, still not lifting his eyes. Yes, muttered Sonia. Oh, yes, it is. She added hastily, as though in that lay her means of escape. My landlady's clock has just struck. I heard it myself. Does she have somewhere to be? If it's 11 o'clock at night, maybe she does. I've come to you for the last time, Raskolnikov went on gloomily. Although this was the first time. I may perhaps not see you again. Are you going away? I don't know. Tomorrow. Then you're not coming to Katerina Ivanovna tomorrow. Sonia's voice shook. I think that's her mom. I don't know. I shall know tomorrow morning. Never mind that. I've come to say one word. He raised his brooding eyes to her and suddenly noticed that he was sitting down while she was all the while standing before him. Why are you standing? Sit down, he said in a changed voice, gentle and friendly. She sat down. He looked kindly and almost compassionately at her. How thin you are. What a hand. Quite transparent, like a dead hand. He took her hand. Sonia smiled faintly. I've always been like that, she said. Even when you lived at home? Yes. Of course you were, he added abruptly, and the expression of his face and the sound of his voice changed again suddenly. He looked around him once more. You rent this room from the Kapernamovs? Yes. They live there through that door? Yes. They have another room like this. All in one room? Yes. I should be afraid in your room at night, he observed gloomily. They're very good people, very kind, answered Sonia, who still seemed bewildered. And all the furniture, everything is theirs. They're very kind, and the children too often come to see me. They all stammer, don't they? Yes, he stammers and he's lame. And his wife too. It's not exactly that she stammers, but she can't speak plainly. She is a very kind woman, and he used to be a house serf. There are 7 children. Ooh. But as I was saying, I think they had a lot of kids in those days because it wasn't uncommon for kids to die young back in those days. It's only the eldest one that stammers, and the others are simply ill, but they don't stammer. But where did you hear about them? She added with some surprise. Your father told me then. He told me all about you. He told me all about you, and how you went out at 6 o'clock and came back at 9. And how Katerina Ivanovna knelt down by your bed. Sonia was confused. I'm guessing Marmeladov must have been talking about this when he was, like, in his drunken stupor. He spent all their money on drink, and that's part of the reason why Sonia had to turn to prostitution. I fancied I saw him today, she whispered hesitatingly. Whom? Father. I was walking in the street, out there at the corner about 10 o'clock, and he seemed to be walking in front. It looked just like him. I wanted to go to Katerina Ivanovna. You were walking in the streets? Yes, Sonia whispered abruptly, again overcome with confusion and looking down. Katerina Ivanovna used to beat you, I dare say. Let me Google this real quick just to make sure I have it right. Katerina Ivanovna Marmeladov. pretty sure that's her mom. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah, she's her mom. And Marmeladov's widow. Now. What are you saying? No. Sonia looked at him almost with dismay. You love her then? Love her, of course, said Sonia with plaintive emphasis. And she clasped her hands in distress. You don't. If only you knew. You see, she is quite like a child. Her mind is quite unhinged, you see, from sorrow. And how clever she used to be. How generous, how kind. You don't understand. You don't understand. Sonia said this as though in despair, wringing her hands in excitement and distress. Yeah, but I think Raskolnikov is someone who can relate to her because of his depression. Like, he's like, everything sucks and everyone sucks. And meanwhile, she has been through really rough times, so they kind of just get along. I think Raskolnikov is a little bit different from her in the sense that he is definitely antisocial, and he tends to do horrible. I shouldn't say he tends to, but sometimes he does horrible things, like the double murder we saw earlier in the book. Her pale cheeks flushed. There was a look of anguish in her eyes. Like he does definitely have a tendency to push people away, Raskolnikov. Her pale cheeks flushed. There was a look of anguish in her eyes. It was clear that she was stirred to the very depths, that she was longing to speak, to champion, to express something. A sort of insatiable compassion, if one may so express it, was reflected in every feature of her face. Beat me? How can you? Good heavens, beat me. And if she did beat me, what then? What of it? You know nothing about it. She is so unhappy. How unhappy. And ill. Well, she's another one that had like 4 different kids. She had like 4 kids. And yeah, she was pretty dang sick. She is seeking righteousness. She is pure. She has such faith that there must be righteousness everywhere, and she expects it. If you were to torture her, she wouldn't do wrong. She doesn't see that it's impossible for people to be righteous, and she's angry at it. Like a child, she is good. What will happen to you? Sonia looked at him inquiringly. They are left on your hands, you see. They were all in your hands before, though, and your father came to you to beg for drink. Well, how will it be now? I don't know, Sonia articulated mournfully. Will they stay there? I don't know. They are in debt for the lodging, but the landlady, I hear, said today that she wanted to get rid of them. And Katerina Ivanovna says that she won't stay another minute. How is it that she's so bold? She relies upon you. Oh no, don't talk like that. We are one, we live like one. Sonia was agitated again and even angry, as though a canary or some other little bird were to be angry. And what could she do? What could she do? She persisted, getting hot and excited. And how she cried today. Her mind's unhinged, haven't you noticed it? At one minute she's worrying like a child that everything should be right tomorrow. The lunch and all that. Then she's wringing her hands, spitting blood. Weeping, and all at once she will begin knocking her head against the wall in despair. Then she will be comforted again. She builds all her hopes on you. She says that you will help her now, and that she will borrow a little money somewhere and go to her native town with me. Set up a boarding school for the daughters of gentlemen, and take me to superintend it. And we will begin a new and splendid life. And she kisses and hugs me, comforts me, and you know she has such faith in her fancies. One can't contradict her. All day long she has been washing, cleaning, mending. She dragged the wash tub into the room with her feeble hands and sank on the bed, gasping for breath. We went this morning to the shops to buy shoes for Planka and Lita, for theirs are quite worn out. Only the money we'd reckoned wasn't enough, not nearly enough. She picked out such dear little boots, for she has taste, you don't know. There in the shop, she burst out crying before the shopman because she hadn't enough. It was sad to see her. Yeah, this is a family that's been through some stuff. I gotta get a refill of beer back. After that, I can understand you're living like this, Raskolnikov said with a bitter smile. He's depressed and cynical. Aren't you sorry for them? Aren't you sorry? Sonia flew at him again. Why, I know you gave your last penny yourself, though you'd seen nothing of it. And if you'd seen everything, oh dear. How often I brought her to tears. Only last week, yes, only a week before his death. I was cruel, and how often I've done it. I've been wretched at the thought of it all day. Sonia wrung her hands as she spoke at the pain of remembering it. You were cruel? Yes, I went to see them. She went on weeping. And Father said, read me something, Sonia. My head aches. Read to me. Here's a book. He had a book he had got from Andrei Semyonovich Lebezhnikov. He lives there. He always used to get hold of such funny books. And I said I can't stay, as I didn't want to read. I'd gone in chiefly to show Katerina Ivanovna some collars. Lizaveta, the peddler, sold me some collars and cuffs cheap, pretty new, embroidered ones. Katerina Ivanovna liked them very much. She put them on and looked at herself in the glass, and she was delighted with them. Make me a present of them, Sonia, she said. Please do. Please do, she said. She wanted them so much. And when could she wear them? They just reminded her of her old happy days. She looked at herself in the glass, admired herself, and she has no clothes at all. No things of her own. Hasn't had all these years. She never asks anyone for anything. She is proud. She'd sooner give away everything. And these she asked for. She liked them so much. And I was sorry to give them. What use are they to you, Katerina Ivanovna? I said. I spoke like that to her. I ought not to have said that. She gave me such a look, and she was so grieved at my refusing her. It was so sad to see. She was not grieved for the collars, but for my refusing. I saw that. If I can only bring it all back, change it, take back those words. Fie, but it's nothing to you. Did you know Lizaveta, the peddler? Yes. Did you know her? Sonia asked with some surprise. Oh, I just casually murdered her like last week. It's not a big deal. Katerina Ivanovna is in consumption. Rapid consumption. She will soon die, said Raskolnikov after a pause without answering her question. He's like, let's just change the subject. Oh, no. And Sonia unconsciously clutched both his hands, as though imploring that she should not. But it will be better if she does die, because then she won't have to worry about all this noise. No, not better. Not at all better, Sonia unconsciously repeated in dismay. And the children, what can you do except take them to live with you? Oh, I don't know, cried Sonia, almost in despair. She put her hands to her head. It was evident that the idea had very often occurred to her before and had only roused it again. What if even now, while Katerina Ivanovna is alive, you get ill and are taken to the hospital? What will happen then? He persisted pitilessly. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what position Sonia's to be in to be a caretaker. I mean, she's not staying in a nice place. She's got evening hours. Like, it doesn't seem like a daycare at all. Like, it doesn't seem like a daycare. How can you? That cannot be. And Sonia's face worked with awful terror. Cannot be? Raskolnikov went on with a harsh smile. You're not insured against it, are you? What will happen to them then? They will be in the street, all of them. She will cough and beg and knock her head against some wall, as she did today, and the children will cry. Then she will fall down, be taken to the police station, into the hospital. She will die, and the children, oh no, God will not let it be, broke at last from Sonia's overburdened bosom. She listened, looking imploringly at him, clasping her hands in dumb entreaty, as though it all depended upon him. Raskolnikov got up and began to walk about the room. A minute passed. Sonia was standing with her hands in her head, hanging in terrible dejection. "And can't you save? Put by for a rainy day?" he asked, suddenly stopping before her. "No," whispered Sonia. "Of course not. Have you tried?" he added almost ironically. "Yes." "And it didn't come off?" "Of course not. No need to ask." And again he paced the room. Another minute passed. "You don't get money every day?" Sonia was more confused than ever, and color rushed into her face again. "No," she whispered with painful effort. "It will be the same with Polenka, no doubt," he said suddenly. "No, no, it can't be, no." Sonia cried aloud in desperation, as though she had been stabbed. God would not allow anything so awful. He let others come to it. "No, no, God will protect her. God," she repeated beside herself. "But perhaps there is no God at all," Raskolnikov answered with a sort of malignance, laughed, and looked at her. Sonia's face suddenly changed. A tremor passed over it. She looked at him with unutterable reproach, tried to say something, but could not speak, and broke into bitter, bitter sobs, hiding her face in her hands. It's definitely sad to see it. "You say, Katerina Ivanovna's mind is unhinged. Your own mind is unhinged," he said after a brief silence. 5 minutes passed. He still paced up and down the room in silence, not looking at her. At last he went up to her, his eyes glittered. He put his 2 hands on her shoulders and looked straight into her tearful face. His eyes were hard, feverish, and piercing. His lips were twitching. All at once he bent down quickly and, dropping to the ground, kissed her foot. Sonia drew back from him as from a madman. Certainly he looked like a madman. "What are you doing to me?" she muttered, turning pale, and a sudden anguish clutched at her heart. He stood up at once. "I did not bow down to you. I bowed down to all the suffering of humanity," he said wildly, and walked away to the window. "Listen," he added, turning to her a minute later. "I said just now to an insolent man that he was not worth your little finger, and that I did my sister an honor making her sit beside you." "You said that to them? And in her presence?" cried Sonia, frightened. "Sit down with me an honor? Why? I'm dishonorable." "And why did you say that?" "It was not because of your dishonor and your sin I said that of you, but because of your great suffering." "But you are a great sinner, that's true," he added almost solemnly. "Your worst sin is that you have destroyed and betrayed yourself for nothing. Isn't that fearful? Isn't it fearful that you're living in this filth which you loathe so? At the same time, you know yourself, you've only to open your eyes, that you're not helping anyone by it, not saving anyone from anything. Tell me," he went on almost in a frenzy, "how this shame and degradation can exist in you side by side with other people, opposite holy feelings. It would be better, 1,000 times better and wiser, to leap into the water and end it all." Yeah, he's definitely a cynic. "But what would become of them?" Sonia asked faintly, gazing at him with eyes of anguish, but not seeming surprised at his suggestion. Yeah, bitter cynicism fits him. Raskolnikov looked strangely at her. He read it all in her face, so she must have had that thought already, perhaps many times, and earnestly she had thought out in her despair how to end it, and so earnestly, that now she scarcely wondered at his suggestion. She had not even noticed the cruelty of his words. The significance of his reproaches and his peculiar attitude to her shame she had, of course, not noticed either, and that too was clear to him. But he saw how monstrously the thought of her disgraceful, shameful position was torturing her, and had long tortured her. What, he thought, could hitherto have hindered her from putting an end to it? And I believe that Raskolnikov saw a woman jump off the bridge into the water. Like he's just like walking down the street, And he just like sees this woman come up next to him. She just like jumps off the bridge, and he's like, "Okay, just another day in Petersburg." Yeah, I can't remember how long ago that was though. It was definitely earlier in the book. I think it was like the fifth or sixth chapter that was. Okay. Only then he realized what those poor little orphan children and that pitiful half-crazed Katerina Ivanovna knocking her head against the wall in her consumption meant for Sonia. But nevertheless, it was clear to him again that with her character and the amount of education she had after all received, she could not in any case remain so. He was still confronted by the question, how could she have remained so long in that position without going out of her mind, since she could not bring herself to jump into the water? Of course, he knew that Sonia's position was an exceptional case, though unhappily not unique and not infrequent indeed. But that very exceptionalness, her tinge of education, and her previous life might, one would have thought, have killed her at the first step on that revolting path. What held her up, surely not depravity. All that infamy had obviously only touched her mechanically. Not one drop of real depravity had penetrated to her heart. He saw that. He saw through her as she stood before him. There are three ways before her, he thought: the canal, the madhouse, or at last to sink into depravity, which obscures the mind and turns the heart to stone. The last idea was the most revolting, but he was a skeptic. He was young, abstract, and therefore cruel. So he could not help believing that the last end was the most likely. But can that be true? He cried to himself. Can that creature who has still preserved the purity of her spirit be consciously drawn at last into that sink of filth and iniquity? Iniquity is a word meaning immoral or unfair behavior. Can the process already have begun? Can it be that she has only been able to bear it till now, because vice has begun to be less loathsome to her? No, no, that cannot be, he cried, as Sonia had just before. No, what has kept her from the canal till now is the idea of sin, and they the children. If she hasn't gone out of her mind, who says she has not gone out of her mind? Is she in her senses? Can one talk, can one reason as she does? How can she sit on the edge of the abyss of loathsomeness, into which she is slipping, and refuse to listen when she is told of danger? Does she expect a miracle? No doubt she does. Doesn't that all mean madness? There are no miracles, and this is no miraculous life. Sang Biffy Clyro. I hope I got that reference right. Yeah, Biffy Clyro. He stayed obstinately at the thought. He liked that explanation indeed better than any other. He began looking more intently at her. So you pray to God a great deal, Sonia? He asked her. Sonia did not speak. He stood beside her waiting for an answer. What should I be without God? She whispered rapidly, forcibly glancing at him with suddenly flashing eyes and squeezing his hand. God gives me hope in an otherwise hopeless situation. So that is it, he thought. And what does God do for you? He asked, probing further. Sonia was silent for a long while, as though she could not answer. Her weak chest kept heaving with emotion. Be silent. Don't ask. You don't deserve, she cried suddenly, looking sternly and wrathfully at him. That's it. That's it, he repeated to himself. He does everything, she whispered quickly, looking down again. That's the way out. That's the explanation, he decided, scrutinizing her with eager curiosity, with a new, strange, almost morbid feeling. He gazed at that pale, thin, irregular, angular little face, those soft blue soft blue eyes, which could flash with such fire, such stern energy, the little body still shaking with indignation and anger, and it all seemed to him more and more strange, almost impossible. She's a religious maniac, he repeated to himself. There was a book lying on the chest of drawers. He had noticed it every time he paced up and down the room. Now he took it up and looked at it. It was the New Testament in the Russian translation. It was bound in leather, old and worn. Where did you get that? He called to her across the room. She was still standing in the same place, 3 steps from the table. It was brought me, she answered, as it were unwillingly, not looking at him. Who brought it? Lizaveta. I asked her for it. Lizaveta, strange, he thought. Everything about Sonia seemed to him stranger and more wonderful every moment. He carried the book to the candle and began to turn over the pages. Where's the story of Lazarus? He asked suddenly. Lazarus is a guy who I believe died, and Jesus brought him back from the dead, I'm pretty sure. Sonia looked obstinately at the ground and would not answer. She was standing sideways to the table. Where is the raising of Lazarus? Find it for me, Sonia. Yeah, he's brought back from the dead. She stole a glance at him. You're not looking in the right place. It's in the 4th Gospel, she whispered sternly, without looking at him. Find it and read it to me, he said. He sat down with his elbow on the table, leaned his head on his hand, and looked away sullenly, prepared to listen. In 3 weeks' time they'll welcome me in the madhouse. I shall be there if I'm not in a worse place, he muttered to himself. I think he'll just be in the normal Hooskow. Raskolnikov. Sonia heard Raskolnikov's request distrustfully and moved hesitatingly to the table. She took the book, however. Haven't you read it? She asked, looking up at him across the table. Her voice became sterner and sterner. Long ago, when I was at school. Read. And haven't you heard it in the church? I haven't been. Do you often go? No, whispered Sonia. Raskolnikov smiled. I understand. And you won't go to your father's funeral tomorrow? Yes, I shall. I was at church last week, too. I had a requiem service. For whom? For Lizaveta. She was killed with an axe. He's like, I know. It was me. His nerves were more and more strained. His head began to go round. Were you friends with Lizaveta? Yes, she was good. She used to come. Not often, she couldn't. We used to read together and talk. She will see God. The last phrase sounded strange in his ears, and here was something new again. The mysterious meetings with Lizaveta and both of them. Religious maniacs. I shall be a religious maniac myself soon. It's infectious. Kind of strange that she uses the exact same wording that Raskolnikov uses, but okay. Like the way he refers to her is how she's thinking of herself. And he didn't say that, he thought that only. Read, he cried irritably and insistently. I don't know why Raskolnikov doesn't read it. Like, he can. He went to the university, I'm pretty sure. Sonia still hesitated. Her heart was throbbing. She hardly dared to read to him. He looked almost with exasperation at the unhappy lunatic. What for? You don't believe? She whispered softly, as it were breathlessly. Read. I want you to, he persisted. You used to read till Lizaveta. Sonia opened the book and found the place. Her hands were shaking, her voice failed her. Twice she tried to begin and could not bring out the first syllable. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany. She forced herself at last to read. But at the third word her voice broke like an overstrained string. There was a catch in her breath. Raskolnikov saw in part why Sonia could not bring herself to read to him, and the more he saw this, the more roughly and irritably he insisted on her doing so. He understood only too well how painful it was for her to betray and unveil all that was her own. He understood that these feelings really were her secret treasure, which she had kept perhaps for years, perhaps from childhood, while she lived with an unhappy father and a distracted stepmother, crazed by grief. In the midst of starving children and unseemly abuse and reproaches. But at the same time, he knew now and knew for certain that although it filled her with dread and suffering, yet she had a tormenting desire to read and read to him, that he might hear it. To read now, whatever might come of it. He read this in her eyes. He could see it in her intense emotion. She mastered herself, controlled the spasm in her throat, and went on reading the 11th chapter of St. John. She went on to the 19th verse. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. But I know that even now whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. Yeah, it seemed like Christian, praying to God worked differently in those days. Modern religious people will say he works in mysterious ways. Okay, I'm running out of battery. Okay, low power. I'm gonna have to plug my phone in probably. Hold on a second. Should be plugged in now. Okay. Then she stopped again with a shamefaced feeling that her voice would quiver and break again. Jesus said unto her, Thy brother shall rise again. Martha saith unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. He's like, no, but you don't get it. I am the Son of God, yo. I can bring him back today. So let's do it. Oh, Father on high, bring him back. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? She saith unto him. Drawing a painful breath, Sonia read distinctly and forcibly as though she were making a public confession of faith. Yeah, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world. She stopped and looked up quickly at him, but controlling herself went on reading. Raskolnikov sat without moving, his elbows on the table and his eyes turned away. She read to the 32nd verse. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, Lord, if thou hadst been there, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled, and said, Where have ye laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. Some of them said, Could not this man which opened the eyes of the blind have caused that even this man should not have died? Raskolnikov turned and looked at her with emotion. Yes, he had known it. She was trembling in a real physical fever. He had expected it. She was getting near the story of the greatest miracle, and a feeling of immense triumph came over her. Her voice rang out like a bell. Triumph and joy gave it power. The lines danced before her eyes, but she knew what she was reading by heart. At the last verse, Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind? Dropping her voice, she passionately reproduced the doubt, the reproach, and censure of the blind, disbelieving Jews, who in another moment would fall at his feet as though struck by thunder, sobbing and believing. And he too, is blinded and unbelieving. He too will hear. He too will believe. Yes, yes. At once now was what she was dreaming, and she was quivering with happy anticipation. Jesus, therefore, again groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. Jesus said, Take ye away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, saith unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he has been dead 4 days. She laid emphasis on the word for. Jesus saith unto her, Said I not unto thee that if thou wouldst believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he thus had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth. She read loudly, cold and trembling with ecstasy, as though she were seeing it before her eyes. But she didn't. And that's the point. It's a story. Written by Jesus' followers some 100 years plus after his death. So we have no way of confirming any of these accounts. It seems like a Disney movie. What it seems like. Yeah, it's like an animated film. Bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus saith unto them, Loose him and let him go. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. She could read no more, closed the book, and got up from her chair quickly. That is all about the raising of Lazarus. Lazarus, she whispered severely and abruptly. Turning away, she stood motionless, not daring to raise her eyes to him. She still trembled feverishly. The candle end was flickering out in the battered candlestick, dimly lighting up in the poverty-stricken room, the murderer and the harlot who had so strangely been reading together the eternal book. 5 minutes or more passed. I came to speak of something, Raskolnikov said aloud, frowning. He got up and went to Sonia. She lifted her eyes to him in silence. His face was particularly stern, and there was a sort of savage determination in it. I've abandoned my family today, he said, my mother and sister. I'm not going to see them. I've broken with them completely. What for? Asked Sonia, amazed. A recent meeting with his mother and sister had left a great impression which she could not analyze. She heard his news almost with horror. I've only you now, he added. Let us go together. I've come to you, we are both accursed. Let us go our way together. His eyes glittered as though he were mad, Sonia thought in her turn. Go where? She asked in alarm, and she involuntarily stepped back. How do I know? I only know it's the same road. I know that and nothing more. It's the same goal. She looked at him and understood nothing. She knew only that he was terribly, infinitely unhappy. None of them will understand. If you tell them, but I have understood. I need you. That is why I have come to you. I don't understand, whispered Sonia. You'll understand later. Haven't you done the same? You too have transgressed, have had the strength to transgress. You've laid hands on yourself. You've destroyed a life, your own. It's all the same. You might have lived in spirit and understanding, but you'll end in the Haymarket. But you won't be able to stand it, and if you remain alone, you'll go out of your mind like me. You're like a mad creature already, so we must go together on the same road. Let's go. What for? What's all this for? Said Sonia, strangely and violently agitated by his words. What for? Because you can't remain like this. That's why. You must look things straight in the face at last, and not weep like a child and cry that God won't allow it. What will happen if you should really be taken to the hospital tomorrow? She's mad and in consumption. She'll die soon, and the children. Do you mean to tell me that Polenka won't come to grief? Haven't you seen children here at the street corners sent out by their mothers to beg? I found out where the mothers live in what surroundings. Children can't remain children there. It's said the child is vicious and a thief, yet children you know are the image of Christ. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. He bade us honor and love them. They're the humanity of the future. What's to be done? What's to be done? Repeated Sonia, weeping hysterically and wringing her hands. What's to be done? Break what must be done. Break what must be broken. Once and for all, that's all. Take the suffering on oneself. What, you don't understand? You don't understand later. Freedom and power, above all, power. Gotta use the bathroom. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. Okay. Overall, trembling creation and all the ant heap. That's the goal. Remember that. That's my farewell message. Perhaps it's the last time I shall speak to you. If I don't come tomorrow, you'll hear of it all. And then remember these words. Someday later on, in years to come, you'll understand perhaps what they meant. Yeah, don't make any long-term plans, Raskolnikov, because they could be coming to arrest you any minute. If I come tomorrow, I'll tell you who killed Lizaveta. Goodbye. Sonia started with terror. Why? Do you know who killed her? She asked, chill with horror, looking wildly at him. He's like, yeah, it was me. I know and will tell. I know and will tell you. Only you. I've chosen you out. I'm not coming to you to ask forgiveness, but simply to tell you. I chose you out long ago to hear this. When your father talked of you and when Lizaveta was alive, I thought of it. Goodbye. Don't shake hands. Tomorrow. Lizaveta's death was incidental, as you might recall. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was trying to just kill her sister at the time. He went out. Sonia gazed at him as a madman. But she herself was like one insane and felt it. Her head was going round. Good heavens, how does he know who killed Lizaveta? What did those words mean? It's awful, but at the same time, the idea did not enter her head, not for a moment. Oh, he must be terribly unhappy. He has abandoned his mother and sister. What for? What has happened? And what had he in his mind? What did he say to her? He had kissed her foot and said yes. He said it clearly that he could not live without her. Oh, merciful heavens. Sonia spent the whole night feverish and delirious. She jumped up from time to time, wept and wrung her hands, then sank again into feverish sleep and drank to Polanka, Katerina Ivanovna and Lizaveta, of reading the gospel and him with the pale face, with burning eyes, kissing her feet, weeping. On the other side of the door on the right, which divided Sonia's room from Madame Reschlich's flat, was a room which had long stood empty. A card was fixed on the gate, and a notice stuck in the windows over the canal advertising it to let. Sonia had long been accustomed to the rooms being uninhabited, but all the time Mr. Sverdlov had been standing, listening at the door of the empty room. Okay, like, what was he doing there? I don't know. When Raskolnikov went out, he stood still, thought a moment, went on tiptoe to his own room which adjoined the empty one, brought a chair, and noiselessly carried it to the door that led to Sonia's room. The conversation had struck him as interesting and remarkable, and he greatly enjoyed it. So much so that he brought a chair that he might not in the future, tomorrow for instance, have to endure the inconvenience of standing a whole hour, but might listen in comfort. Okay, so Sverdlov was apparently eavesdropping on that entire conversation. Okay. Next time, chapter 5, he might be using that to try to smooth things over with Raskolnikov. Like, hey buddy, if you can help me get in with Avdotya, I'll help you smooth it out with Sonia. We'll have to see. Alright, Stoner Show. We'll be right back. Thanks for watching.